Okay. All right, we'll call the meeting to order then. Just going around quickly, I'm Ray Gilmet. I'm the chair of the Perry Broadband Committee. Next.
I'm Elaine Abbott, and I am Regional Broadband Coordinator with Sunrise County Economic Council, serving all of Washington County.
I'm Dan Sullivan. I'm President of Downeast Broadband Utility.
I'm Chris Wade. I'm the Tribal Broadband Consultant for the Wabanaki Nations through Four Directions.
Yeah.
I'm Paul Grimshaw. I'm a resident of Perry. I'm an early adopter of high-speed internet in the area. In fact, every form of internet for Perry, I've been, I think, the first customer. And so, but I'm an IT professional. I teach part-time at the college in Calais sometimes, and I currently have fiber on Route 1 already. And so it was suggested that I contact Ray and offer some input. I don't know if you guys need it or not. It sounds like you guys are, well ahead of what things are progress. And so I'm just here to observe, I guess, and say hi.
Glad you're here, Paul. And then John, don't be bashful.
John Sermershine, Perry Broadband, High Speed Broadband Committee member. Yes, that's it.
And I'm Tina Sullivan, and what he said. And also I'm the Perry Select Board Administrative Assistant.
And that leaves you, Scotty.
Scott McNichol. I'm on the Board of Selectmen in the town of Perry.
Okay, well, before we get to Dan's presentation, why don't we just knock out the minutes that we didn't do last time because we didn't have a quorum. This is the meeting of the 9th of February. Unless there are some other additions or changes that y'all want to make, can I have a motion to accept? Not all at once,
Yep.
though.
Sure.
Second?
I'll second.
All those in favor? It passes. We have
Yep.
our first official minutes. Yay.
Right.
Okay, Dan, you ready to rock?
Yep, I can give you a brief overview of what DBU is and what it's done and where it's at right now, and then probably open the floor to questions. I think that's probably a good way to give you a more in-depth setup of what exactly is going on. But I'll give you a brief rundown of what we've done so far. Back in 2015 that all this project began. It actually got rolling in 2018, but Calais and Baileyville both decided that they wanted a fiber to the home network. We approached the incumbents and asked them if they would, help us do it. And they said, no, they couldn't make any money at it. So they weren't willing to take that, take that leap. So, we went back to them again and said, well, the towns would borrow money and help them do it so they could make it worthwhile to them. And they still said no. We knew what we wanted technology wise. We knew we wanted a fiber to the home network. We wanted to have what's referred to as a home run network, meaning that every subscriber in the system gets their own dedicated fiber back to the CO or the central office cabinet. We wanted that to help address what's going on in broadband for years, where every 3 or 4 years it keeps reinventing itself. We kept to go back and do it again and again and again. And there's been a lot of money spent across the nation building these systems when we could have actually built fiber in the first place and saved a lot of money. So we wanted to avoid that by making sure that what we put in place would be something that'd be viable for the next 50 to 75 years. So that's what we did. The initial project was that we would leave no area out. 100% of Calais and Baileyville would get a connection if they wanted it. Now I'm going to stop for a second here and go back to something that I learned after I did the Alexander presentation, that one of the first things I should say right off the bat is the way the model works with Downeast, it does not impact the taxpayer. This is a, dollar wise, that's what's in everybody's head. How much money is this going to cost? Well, this is paid for by the subscribers. It's by the people actually buy the service. So if you're in Perry or you're in Calais or Baileyville, whatever, and you do not want it, you want to stay with Spectrum or you want Consolidated or Hughes or any of the other providers, you're certainly able to do that. There's no penalties. There's nothing around that. It's a strictly volunteer to join the service. It's done quite well. We're now in Calais and Baileyville are 100% done. Every resident or business there has access to it. Alexander is about 85, 90% done. We're signing up customers there. We had a few easement things we had to do. We just solved that problem. So in the next week or two, Alexander should be 100% done. Indian Township, which came on board last year, they were about 95% done. They're signing up customers left and right. Cooper, where I live, and Princeton both put in with Connect Me for grants to help build the networks. And in Cooper's case, our bill was around $600,000, and we were able to secure a grant for 400 of that. Just learned today that finally, after a lot of legal wrangling, that they're actually going to disperse the first 25% next week. So that, and I've signed the contracts with Pioneer. So the Cooper build is now in pole licensing status, and we're starting to move on that. Princeton will move along a parallel route. So basically, what we have one ISP right now. It's what's called an open access dark fiber network, meaning that the individual towns own the physical infrastructure that's in their town. So in Calais' case, the citizens of Calais own the physical cables that are on the poles, as it is with Baileyville and Alexander, anybody who's in DBU. The way this all works is we've signed what's called an interlocal agreement amongst all the towns so that we all work together to make this work. So one of the more attractive things I believe in this setup is that the more subscribers we get on the system, the quicker we pay down the loans that built the system. And this is a collective effort. It's not, Calais out for itself, Baileyville out for itself, Cooper out for itself. Everybody works together. So when the subscribers, giving an example, we have one ISP right now. We're negotiating with another. We're hoping to get a second ISP, but a 100 by 100 connection to Pioneer on this system is $59 a month. So that's, your setup. There's no modem costs. There's no installation costs. It's basically $59 a month. When you pay that $59 for your 100 by 100 connection, Pioneer sends 25 of it back to DBU for each subscriber. So we take that $25 coming from each subscriber, and that's how we pay the loans back. That's how we pay the maintenance. That's how we pay our network operator who handles all the physical connections and all that stuff. So basically, the more people we get on the system, faster we'll be able to pay down the loans. Once that happens, right now we're in conversations with Machias Savings and the First about long-term. We're on line of credits right now, but we're going to convert to long-term. So once that happens, we're looking at about a 20-year payback. I think that'll be faster than that. But once that happens, once the notes are paid, that $25 that comes in for every subscriber every single month is still coming in. So it generates revenue. So we're hoping that, in the future, once we've set aside for maintenance and any expansion we might want to do, that actually there'll be funds going back to the towns, that the people on the select boards or the town councils can decide what they want to do with that revenue, once we get to that stage. So we were very able to make this quite attractive in a number of cases. Number one, it was far less expensive than what Spectrum was offering. It was far faster than what Spectrum or Consolidated was offering. And, in a case where you're paying up an outside ISP from wherever, every dollar you pay them, it goes out. Nothing comes back. So this model has been quite attractive. I've had conversations, I would estimate probably with at least 50 towns across the state of Maine in the last couple of years, because everybody out there is trying to do what you guys are trying to do. They're trying to fix a problem. And they've asked, I've given these presentations to a lot of towns, and this is one approach. I will tell you with I'm going to go to questions here in a second, so I won't talk forever. Elaine knows that you got to tell me when to shut up, Elaine. What happens is, we put these systems, in place, and then customers, as they sign up, we find that one is telling another, telling another, telling another. So our problem right now, which is a good problem to have, is that we've got over 500 people waiting to sign up, and we can't get them connected because we don't have the workforce. Pioneer doesn't have the workforce to be able to physically make a connection from the telephone pole into their house. So the model is very attractive. People are drawn to it because it brings money back into your town. It is less expensive, and it's fast, and it's what they refer to as future-proof. It should be available the next 50, 75 years. So I will step out of that for a second. If I can field questions, or I can give more information in certain areas, you guys just throw it at me.
Okay, I'll go. So are you suggesting that Perry create a local group between Eastport, Pleasant Point, and Charlotte? Is that the plan for our area, or would it just be Perry? Or
I think what's going on with the East right now, one thing I should say, as far as the MCA, which is the main connectivity authority, where you're going to want to go for grants, that's where the money is right now. So you certainly want to get in on that. I will tell you that the best way to be attractive to them is to reach out to everyone. And you've reached out to me, to Downeast Broadband. I'll give you our pitch. It's important that you reach out to Consolidated, to Spectrum, to the other players in the field, because they're going to want to see that you've branched out, giving everybody an opportunity.
Okay, so Danny, I'm going to jump in to try to, Paul, Danny is not trying to suggest that Perry do anything. Eastport and Pleasant Point or Sabag are looking at fiber definitely as an option. Neither community, to the best of my knowledge, has decided on any model whatsoever. I know for a fact Eastport has not. And so Danny's not trying to suggest anything, but only to present information. So every single week, next week, I can't remember who you meet with. It could be Spectrum.
It is.
We'll be giving, okay, thank you, Ray. Spectrum will be doing the same thing next week. And then Consolidate, or Axiom and Consolidated. So Perry is doing its due diligence.
Right. Which
And that's it. That's all.
I think they're also looking at the Eastport group, and Chris can weigh in on this, but they're looking at a possible combination of Eastport, Perry, and Pleasant Point working together to have to make this happen. There's certain advantages to that. Perry being on Route 1, which has access to 3-ring binder fiber, which is your connection to the world.
Yeah.
If you come down to the Perry border, you're basically sitting at Pleasant Point now, which makes it easier for Pleasant Point to be able to connect, which then makes it easier for Eastport to connect.
Right.
So it is advantageous in some instances to be able to work together. I know in the Cooper grant that we put in, which was one of the reasons the main connectivity authority gave us the grant, was that when we designed the network, we put additional fiber in the backbone so that other towns like Medibemps or Township 14 that are right next to Cooper would have access. They have middle mile access to the internet, which is a huge savings, which if Perry were to join with Indiantown or Pleasant Point and Eastport, that's going to help those two towns get out to Route 1 as well.
Yeah.
And I will tell you, the MCA, they really like collaborative setups. They really like to see groups of people work together to try to solve a problem for a big area. It makes them look good, and it's just kind of a good political win.
And
Right.
to be honest, they've been very clear that a small area trying to do this individually is probably just not going to get funded. That it just doesn't have a great chance of success. Has historically been the case, and the cost and the return on investment and things like that are just kind of an insurmountable thing. So the more communities that get together to look at the project collectively, they have a much higher chance of being funded by MCA or any other state funding.
So just for folks who may not be aware, I just want to jump in. MCA is Maine Connectivity Authority. And so one question for Dan and Chris, because you guys are the tech geniuses here. So Dan, Dan was referring to speeds of 100 symmetrical or 100 over 100. And so what does that mean, Dan?
That's basically, that's your broadband connection speed. A big piece to this that the cable companies, they know it, but they don't promote it, is that they offer asymmetrical systems, not symmetrical. And it's become far more important now to have the same speed up as down, because we're doing a lot of more cloud computing, security cameras, uploading of images for healthcare. There's a real strong need to have that symmetrical connection, as opposed to the asymmetrical that DSL or the cable systems or satellite or fixed wireless offer. And that also reduces latency, which is the biggest problem with communications across the internet, is how fast it goes back and forth. I know that there's a lot of hype out there where the cable companies are saying we're giving 300, 400, 500 down, but 20 up. And people say, well, all I do is watch movies. But that's not what all people do. And that's not how entrepreneurs work, how people that work from home work, how students need to work. You need that up speed. So it's very important, in my opinion, I think Elaine must have sent off the questions and the statements and stuff that were put out there for
I did,
on how
yeah.
it works. That it's important, in my opinion, as you talk to these people that may provide the service to you, just exactly what it is they're going to give you. And in our opinion, that's why we went with the fiber, network, was that 100 by 100 is base. We're going to go up from there. We'll go 500 by 500, 1 gig by gig, 10 gig. It's limitless. Once the infrastructure is in place, it's a matter of changing lasers on each end of the system, and you can increase the speeds as you need it.
I'm going to just tell Perry, this is fact. When I recording these meetings, they're generally, say, an hour of recorded time. It takes me 2 hours to upload the recordings of these meetings. So this meeting is happening in real time, sort of thing. But when I go to upload it, and I'm an esport, I think everybody here knows I'm an esport, and it takes me 2 hours to upload your 1 hour meeting. So I can send it to Tina and so that all the rest of you can watch it if you want to. 2 hours for a 1 hour meeting. That's the difference between upload and download. Just saying.
I would suggest that as you talk to these other companies, you really stress that. What can you do for us? Because just think of just the healthcare piece. Just think of transmitting images of healthcare across the internet. Imagine waiting 2 hours for your information to get to your doctor. That should happen in 10 seconds, which it can.
So Dan, this is John. So when we talk to these other ISPs, and you ask them what they can do for us, are we talking about the upload aspect of it? Is that what we're, I know that they all brag about the downloads, but is that what we should be, asking them specifically what the upload speed is also?
Yes, you should, in my opinion, and the MCA looks at it this way as well. The grant agencies, they're really encouraging fiber networks. They're encouraging that you put a system in place that is the same speeds up and down. So when a spectrum comes into the game, their technology is limited by the fact that they're using copper to transmit the data. They don't have the ability to give you the same speed up and down. They can get higher speeds up, but they can't make them the same, and they can't get really high speeds up. They're just the limitations of the technology. So I think if you want to build a system that you're not going to have to look at again for the next 50 to 75 years, you want to look at fiber. And I'm going to tell you that MCA, the Maine Connectivity Authority, they're looking for fiber networks. If you were to come to them and say you want to build a cable network, you may be able to slide through, but I think you're going to have a far better chance with something that's the same speeds up and down.
Well, I 2 questions. Will there be a degradation in the upload and download speeds as more people get on board? And I did see a newsletter from the MCA, and there was a contract awarded to Consolidated, and don't they still use copper wire unless it was under the name Fidium?
They do, but they don't. Consolidated, they've gotten a lot of money through the Connect America Fund, through the RDOF program, through numerous federal systems where they've basically built out DSL networks. The recent grants that they got from the MCA on that first round is about 16 million for various towns, but those are all fiber networks. They're no longer building DSL. They wouldn't get the funding for that. MCA wouldn't give it to them. So they're building fiber networks. So Consolidated is certainly going to build a fiber network. Their model is, I'll let them, when they do their presentation, your due diligence as to how that gets funded, how they're actually going to do it. They're not going to come in and pay 100% of the cost, and MCA is not going to give you 100% of the cost. So there's going to be some kind of a mix there as to how you actually build the network. But they're doing fiber. Nobody's, only the cable company is expanding out their cable systems.
And John, to kind of lump on that as well, the CCI, sort of direction that they're taking their network should be a very big clue to everybody that's looking at this. The reason they're going with fiber is because it's the only solution that makes any sense. It would be much cheaper for them to try to upgrade, their DSL networks. In some cases, they could bring more fiber in and try to expand it, support it, beef it up. But they know that that's a dead end. And the same reason for trying to build any type of a coaxial, old type cable system, which would be an upgrade from their DSL, but it still wouldn't match fiber. So these guys are very smart. They know what they're doing, and they know that the best return on their investment, which is the business they're in, is to build a fiber network.
And John, just so you know, they haven't, on a fiber network, they haven't maxed it out yet. The technology is not there that says we've reached a limit. So they're still producing faster and faster lasers. They're able to compress data, push it. They haven't, a fiber connection, they haven't jammed it up yet. To your question about, does it clog up with the more subscribers you have online? No, it does not. They haven't found a way to clog it up yet.
And I know that you spoke of basically workers, people do maintenance and so forth, how it's a challenge. Isn't fiber optics much more reliable, requires less maintenance? I mean, you use lasers versus possibly switching units. Coaxial cables are subject to corrosion, which means signal attenuation. So
it's a lot less, there's a lot less maintenance to fiber. Give you an example of between two telephone poles. If you string a copper telephone line, that's putting about 70,000 pounds of pressure on those two poles. You run a fiber line and it's putting about 7,000 pounds. It's able to whip around in the wind. They put strand with it. Chris knows as he builds these kind of networks, it'll whip around in the wind and it'll hang onto itself, and it very rarely will go down unless a truck hits a tree. There's no electricity in it. It's just light. So you have no electric, there's no interference there. So, and there is a lot less labor. The problem that I referenced earlier, which I think you brought up, is not once it's in place, it's getting the connection from, like, the networks in Calais and Baileyville and Alexander. Those are all done. It's getting the connection from the pole to the person's house. Right now, it's sitting in front of their house. But if somebody calls up and says, we would like to have the service, Pioneer has to send a tech out there and has to attach a fiber cable from the existing network, which in the town, going to the house. That's where we're having the problem labor-wise. But just to give, the Pioneer is teaching a class at vocational school. They've got 11 students. This is free to the students, teaching them how to actually make those connections. Pioneer is committed to hiring 6 of them. And talking with Tim, who's teaching the class, he says he got some really good students. So we're thinking in the next 4 to 6 weeks, we're going to get those ladies and gentlemen loose. So that issue about getting connections from the pole to the house should get better.
So, Dan, I have a question for you, seeing how that you brought up about a truck hitting a pole. So if a community owns the infrastructure and is part of the DBU, Downeast Broadband Utility Cooperative, who comes to fix if somebody hits a pole and knocks down the fiber strands? Who fixes that? Who pays for it? How does that work?
The way it works in DBU is the towns, sign what's called an interlocal agreement, which means that they're all working together. We have a network operator who is he's the boots on the ground guy. He's the one that's making the physical connections. So we've had this happen out on Route 9 with somebody who had one too many cocktails and took out a telephone pole. But what Bill Barnett, our network operator, does, he then contracts a company. We use Pioneer mostly, but there's others that go out there and fix the pole. So if you're in Perry and there's an accident and a line goes down, you'll note what we do with DBU, which other contractors do not. You'll notice as you're driving down the road, if you see a little strip of orange on a telephone pole, that's an indicator that it's a fiber cable. DBU's happens to be blue, but on every single telephone pole, our little blue connector that shows that it's fiber, we actually have the telephone number for the network operator. So that if a line goes down, the police or whoever's there there's a number right there. Call this number and then we'll dispatch somebody out to fix it. That was a good question, Elaine. Maintenance.
And John, I can follow up a little bit more too on the maintenance issue, reliability issue. The biggest drawback to your legacy cable systems like a Spectrum and a coax network is what Danny mentioned, that there's no AC on it. It's a fiber network isn't powered in the same way. Out on your cable lines, you'll see big boxes, big metal boxes. They're amplifiers because signal can only travel so far, and it's much less than it is on a fiber network. So every one of those amplifiers has electronics in it, chips, all the normal things that can go bad. They cause noise, they need maintenance, they have to be balanced. And fiber just doesn't have those same components. It's built very different. It's all centralized power in one spot. And it's the reason they call it, and you'll hear sometimes, is a passive network. And that's why, because there's no amplifiers out in the distribution system. We have cabinets that are centrally located. That's where your equipment is, your gear. The rest of it is just passing it along a piece of glass all the way through the line, and there is no AC on it. So there's just so much less to go wrong. It's a much more robust system and much less prone to errors. And even when those poles get hit, one of the really good things about fiber is that, one, it doesn't have those pieces of equipment, and it's really rugged, despite what everybody thinks that it's glass and it's right. It actually takes a lot to damage it. So a pole gets hit, all they have to do is put it back up. In most cases, there's rarely damage. And that whole time, the system can still be running. It doesn't take very much for a cable system to lose power if one of those amplifiers happens, a pole hit, whatever system just goes out. Fiber will pretty much stay running as long as that central cabinet has power.
So how far can you push the signal out on fiber optics?
Miles, and it depends on the
miles,
power of
right?
the transmitter. Yeah. 65,000 is one of the sort of targets to stay within what they call a GPON network. But that's just the sort of the local part of it. They're pushing these things miles upon miles, and it's pretty crazy. They're 65,000 feet. Sorry.
Riffing a little bit on Elaine's question, if somebody in their home has a problem with fiber, who takes care of that? Is it the ISP? Is it DBU?
The ISP will, your relationship with, if you're on the DBU system, the towns own the physical network, but the actual connection, the signal coming into your home is the ISP.
Right.
So Pioneer would be, if you have a problem, all of a sudden, you're watching TV and it all just stops and things aren't working. Mm-hmm. You make a call to Pioneer and they will, dispatch a tech if they have to, or they'll fix it remotely. They're getting much, much better. They have systems in place now where one of the things that we notice is that a lot of people, we make sure that when somebody signs up to the DBU system, that the tech for Pioneer brings his laptop and he's right there showing the consumer that this is what's coming to your house. And they'll show it's 100 by 100. Or whatever, they can buy more than that, but 100 by 100 is at 59, but you'll see that that's right at your house. What happens is that people need to realize that your internal equipment is going to impact how good that signal is. So if you've got older computers, you got an old router, you got, a lot of interference, that's going to impact the signal. That doesn't mean your fiber signal isn't great. It just means your equipment isn't. And they've now got systems, there's different ones, but there's one that Pioneer uses called Plume. They're little modules you just plug into an electrical outlet, and they can actually see, they don't look at your data, but they can actually see the communications within your home. and they can tell you that the iPad on your second floor is on the wrong frequency and it's taking too much bandwidth, and tell you to disconnect it or change something. They can actually help people through that.
Hmm.
So they're making it easier for the internal stuff.
It's a good idea.
Yeah. I know in my wife and I have a home in New Hampshire. That's where I am right now. And we've got a Fidium connection here, consolidated. It's fiber. It's a 1 gig connection. Works great. But they switched us over here a month or so ago to Fidium. And when the tech came to the house, when he hooked up the router, there are no lights on it. It's completely dark. And I said, well, how do I know it's running? And he said, we have more trouble with people and lights. So we just decided we're not giving them lights. So you have no idea the thing's running or not. You just know it doesn't work, and then you call them up and they fix it. But we've had it now here for a fiber connection here for probably 3 or 4 years, and it's gone down once when a telephone pole knocked out our line. A tree hit it and disconnected. Other than that, it's run fine.
So it's the
I have,
classic black box then.
yeah, good, Ray. Good one, Ray. So, just because I'm thinking about that 100 over 100 symmetrical speeds, and because I just did all the cross tabulation of your survey, that some of your residents are saying their speeds are 7 download and 0.7 upload.
It's consolidated. DSL.
Right, right.
That's
So,
me.
so in that respect, and I don't know what those folks are paying for their internet connection. But Dan, if I'm hearing you correctly, it's 100 over 100, $59 a month. Is
Correct.
that
And
correct?
Pioneer they'll run up to 1,200 feet from the telephone pole to the house at no charge. If you're further off the telephone pole from that 1,200 feet, then you have to negotiate with them and they'll charge you per foot. To, if you have to go, some people have longer driveways than that, but they'll cover that. That initial, it's $59, no taxes. It's all included. And if you don't want the service, you just tell them I don't want it, and they'll shut it off and you stop paying. So it's very reasonable, and that's going to get better. We're talking with Pioneer, and they're late summer. They're going to be increasing those speeds, and there are going to be some really good offerings late summer that are really going to be very attractive, even faster.
Do you have a ratio of how many people you expect to be on this? I know earlier on you mentioned something about no prices to the town or no cost to the town, and you was going to get a loan. Do you have some sort of ratio of how many people you expect in each town, or do you expect 100%? I mean, obviously not 100% of people are going to do it. And what happens?
That's an awesome question. That is probably the question.
Yeah.
When you go for, it's called take rate. I know in the Calais and Baileyville area, there was no grants back then. So the towns basically, they just secured the loans. They said to the bank that if this network fails, if we don't get enough subscribers, then the towns would pay for it. But we had done enough surveys ahead of time knowing that we needed about 30% of the population in order to make that work. And we've hit the 30%. So we're fine in that respect, and that'll increase. But a town like Perry or others, you need to look at your potential households. How many, I'm just going to say 200. I don't know how many are in Perry, but you just look at the 200, say it's 200, and you get a cost for the network. What you want to do, and this is the opportune time to do it, is you want to make a grant request to MCA for as much of that as you can. In Cooper's case, we went for 2/3 of the network, 2/3 of the cost, because there's not many people in Cooper. So we knew that, we have to get enough subscribers to cover about $158,000 of that build. So because of the small population, we could see those numbers working. In Perry, you're going to want to do the same thing. You're going to want to get a high level cost, which I think they're doing more and more of that. Chris can address that better than I can, but they would give you a high level cost to build the network. Say it's $1 million. Then you were to look at how many potential subscribers you might have, then say, okay, we're not going to get 100%. You're right, Scott. They're not all going to go for it, but with the proper, education and people actually seeing how these networks work. I know there's someone on there said he had a fiber connection. He can certainly explain how well it works. when you actually have one. But once you get that information, then you can say, okay, how much of grant money do we need to go for in order to make this work? I know on the DBU side, we would not take, it wouldn't make any sense for us to take on a town that would have far more debt than they could reasonably pay by the number of subscribers they could get. So that's a math equation you need to do. You need to be able to see how many potentials and then look at, what's your percentage you need in order to make it work. I will tell you that the banks are very, very eager. They're very eager to work with small towns to make this work. So there's opportunities out there, to in our case, we do line of credit until we get go to long-term financing, but there's opportunities out there to make this work. I guess the bottom line is, I know Peggy Schaefer, the ex-lead of the Connect Me, was, with all this money out there, you want to shoot for the moon. You want to go for as much as you possibly think you can get, because they're willing to fund an awful lot of it.
I do believe, so I will jump in, Scotty, and say, I believe off the top of my head, Perry has 314 households, and 25% of your households actually took the survey. So that's a pretty good indicator right there
Yeah, that's a good number.
of potential take rate. Yeah.
Where did you get your figure for the households? I was under the impression Perry had 417 homes. And then out of those, I think just a handful of them were seasonal residents that considered them full-time homes. I don't remember. Dean Pike was one of them there, but
yeah. That's a good question. So I use US Census data. Oh,
okay.
Hold on, Tina dropped off. She's trying to come back in. I use US Census data. And so the 2020 data, and I believe it's 314 households, 806, 802 individuals. I think it's 314 households. Your survey results were 25% of households, which is a fairly good indicator of potential take rate. Unhappy people, generally happy people don't respond to surveys like this.
Right.
So what you're saying, Elaine, out of that 25% that responded to the survey, a high percentage of people, the reason they responded is because they want better internet, which is a good thing for us.
Right.
Yeah, so when you get time to read that report that I sent out this afternoon, you will see that I broke the information down by those who work remotely. You have a large population in Perry that work remotely, and I drilled down basically on what they're paying, their satisfaction level with their current ISP or internet service provider. Then I did those who are using their home internet for educational purposes, your community, what your community respondents were saying in narrative sections of the survey. So they're by and large fairly unhappy. So I just wanted to, anyway, just when you're talking about take rate, or Scott was referring to it as, a ratio. It is called a take rate. How many people will take this? That I think you've got a pretty good, whatever, your residents are looking for something different.
So these small towns, I know Perry fairly well. So if you're saying we got 300 homes, I think that's a little more than that myself. We have 33 miles of road. Is it feasible for Downeast to come in and service, even if you got 100% of them? Is that feasible for you to cover 33 miles of road in the town of Perry? I guess I just don't know how it works, but.
Well, you'll get Chris can enter, he can give you some background on this, I believe, but you're going to get a high level cost. Someone's going to look at that. A network design person will look at that and say, your 33 miles of roads or whatever it happens to be in Perry is going to cost X amount of dollars to put a fiber network in there. Once you have that number, then that's how you can then look at what your take rate needs to be based on what you think you might get for a loan. Chris, I think they're moving to the high level design at MCA now, right?
Yeah, actually, we had a couple of conversations this week. Tim is finishing up the high level designs for all three towns. Tilson is still working on granting myself access, as well as Mike Atwater, who's with Tilson, that'll be kind of polishing, importing those into their model so that I'll have visibility, Tilson has visibility, and MCA has visibility to start doing a finer analysis of what the projects look like. And Scott, to just kind of real quick answer your question, at any other point in time, it would absolutely not be feasible if you were trying to fund this as a town by itself, or even in, you know, cooperation with the other towns. If the MCA funding wasn't there, this would never happen. It's just the reality. I mean, this is kind of a probably once in a generational time, you know, for towns and communities to look at projects like this, because it's never worked before, and it'll probably not work afterwards. If this funding dries up, it's probably not doable.
And just to add to that, there's, you know, it's the history for the incumbents have been that, you know, there's not enough people there to make it worth their while to actually build these high-speed networks. That's their rationale for not doing it. I'm not sure how that all works, because I don't work for a big company, but I know that in the Downeast, our situation, we went to Consolidated and Spectrum and asked them, and they didn't want to connect to us because it was too expensive. They couldn't do it. Well, I went back to Consolidated after we were built and up and running. So we've basically taken 3 legs off of their 4-legged stool. We've removed the build cost, we removed the maintenance cost, we removed the operational cost. So Consolidated could be an ISP on our network. They could make a lot of money. So I contacted them and said, well, you know, it's no longer not feasible. Why don't you come on in? Because it's open access. They said, nope, we want to be able to monitor our own network. And I said, you can monitor it. We'll give you access to it. That's not a problem. They still said no, they want to own it.
Yeah.
They don't want these towns to own their own systems. And we believe, the DBU side is, we think these towns should own it. We think it's a utility. It's, you know, we're the only utility in the state of Maine right now, broadband utility. We think it's like roads and bridges. It's sewer and water. It should be owned by the towns, because then you can control it. If you get an ISP in there that's all of a sudden jacking prices up, and you can talk to them, say, wait a minute, no, this is our network. But they don't want to work that way. They want to be able to control it from front to back. And that's not historically been a good thing for us.
Can I spend a few minutes and just trying, from my point of view, understanding your model a little bit better. I guess the word cooperative really does describe how you are organized and how you're pulling all of these communities together, right?
Correct.
Okay, now in that cooperative, you've got townships that have varying numbers of people. And of those numbers of people, they're going to have varying take rates and all that stuff. So a different amount of money comes in from each community, and it comes into DBU, correct?
Yes.
Is there some sort of weighting that you use to send money back to the communities? You said, I think it was $25 or something like that per person. But how does that also go into figuring out how much, I guess it's a calculation, how much money is needed for flow through in order to pay for the loan commitments that each one of these little communities have to make? Because again, they're all going to be different, right?
Correct. That's another good question. That's why because, you know, like to Chris's point about, you know, how expensive it is to do this kind of stuff, the way it was able to work for us is by these towns working together with this interlocal agreement, saying we're all going to pitch in together to take care of everybody's loans. So what happens when the revenue comes in, DBU, our financial person on the DBU board, they pay the bills. They pay the bills for all the towns. Now, to give you an example, or one of the things that makes this work and will make it work even better is that once people understand in these local communities, understand that this is an asset for your town, it's a capital asset that the towns own. So it actually has value to it. And as you get more subscribers on it, then obviously you can pay the notes down quicker.
Right.
We'll take, for example, Indian Township in in Indian Township. They're part of DBU. Well, their network build was done between a philanthropist and grants with there's no loans.
Mm.
So as those subscribers are paying their $25, 25, they pay Pioneer 60 for the connection, 25 comes back. That money goes in and helps pays down the notes for Calais, Baileyville, Alexander, Cooper. It's like everybody working together. So if the education piece gets out there, people understand that the more subscribers you get on this network, the quicker you're going to pay down the loan costs, then the quicker the notes are going to go away. And to answer your question, once that happens, so you've got, say, 40% of the people on the network are in Calais and 20 are in Baileyville. Once the debt is gone, and other than maintenance and any expansion that we need to keep money back so we can actually afford to keep running, is that will proportionately go back to the town based on the number of subscribers in that town. So a larger number of subscribers in Calais, if there's any revenue left after we've covered all the expenses, a chunk of that, a bigger chunk will go to Calais than Baileyville because they have more subscribers.
Okay. Does that mean that all the loans that are created for these different townships are really under the DBU flag?
That's another good question. We've been doing some legal wrangling with MCA here for the last 4 or 5 months. It's been a nightmare. We finally got it straightened out. But basically what DBU is, the towns themselves, like Alexander, Calais, Baileyville, Cooper, and Princeton, the town select boards, they have secured the note. They have told the banks that if this doesn't work, the taxpayers will pay for this.
Okay.
If we can't make this happen, we will actually take care of it. So knowing that, the more people you put on the system, the more stable it is. And we've seen that, just what's happened in the towns that we're in, that the service is good. People are very happy with it. They're not getting those queuing circles anymore. They can have 10, 15, 20 people in their house all connected at the same time. It just works. So once that gets out, it's not easy. It's not hard to sell it. It's very easy to sell it. So that I think you can get the subscribers. It's education. It's letting people understand that, having that dish TV, I know it's easy. You press 12 and you can watch the Patriots, but you're paying $120 a month for it. If you understand how streaming works and you give $40 to Hulu along with your 60 to Pioneer, now for $100, you'll have everything you want and more. So it's just an education piece. We're paying a lot of money for our communication needs between cell phones and TV and internet. You put all those numbers together and add them up. We're overpaying.
Dan, what happens if, Dennisville, they're thinking about basically dropping out, having a township? What happens if one of your partners, one of the towns, basically dissolves? How does that impact all the other towns?
If part of the interlocal agreement, if a town, and they can decide to back out, if they do that, then that particular town is responsible for the network build costs of that town. So they would move out of DBU if they didn't want to be part of the organization any longer. They have the option to do that, but then they would be responsible for the debt.
And
But
just as from a municipal perspective, that for a town to dissolve, or a town or whatever to dissolve, that's up to the state, and that has very, very high standards. So Baileyville, for example, would never be allowed to dissolve. The state would never allow that. Alexander, none of these communities would ever be allowed to dissolve that are part of the DBU network. So they have to have a very, very tiny, tiny, tiny population and basically be completely defunct in order to dissolve on a state level.
Elaine, just from my own understanding on this issue, does the town have to dissolve based on the agreements in order to be able to withdraw from DBU, or can you just withdraw from DBU and then the financial penalties of whatever debt burden you brought in?
They can withdraw at any time. There's part of the interlocal that's written right in the bylaws there, that if you want to opt out, if the select boards or the town council say we don't want this anymore, they can back out.
You're required to pay the full cost of the build or the cost minus the grant, whatever grant funding we receive.
It would be minus the grant, whatever the grant fund is belongs to the town. That's a really good question there, Scott. The way this works is like with the way the grant works in Cooper's grant, we're going to get the first check, next week. The way it works is as the build continues, Pioneer will say they'll spend $10,000 on putting lines up. They will submit an invoice to DBU saying, we need a check for $10,000 in the Cooper build. Then DBU contacts the representative for Cooper, which that's another point in DBU. Every town that comes in, they get a position on the board. So it's usually a select person or somebody that the select people choose, but there'll be a representative from the town on the DBU board. So as the invoice comes in and Pioneer needs to be paid $10,000, DBU contacts the town, contacts Cooper, Lori Pike and Cooper, and says, okay, our network operator has gone out and has noticed, he's verified that this cost is real. So then what the town does is they then either through their grant funds or if they're working off a line of credit, they get a hold of the bank and say, I need you to transfer $10,000 over to DBU so they can pay the bill. That way the town is in the loop for every dime being spent for your respective town. You'll know where it's going. You have to approve it. If some wild thing happens, Pioneer wants a check for 50 grand and you don't see anything happening in town, you have the right to say, well, no, wait a minute. And then we would go out and verify. So we've made sure that the funds that are being, allocated for each individual town are approved, every single dollar, by that town before DBU pays the bill. And we're like in Cooper's case, we got $400,000. We're going to work off that $400,000 before we take a dime from the bank. So once we exhaust the grant money, then we'll go to a line of credit, which is what the other towns have done as we build, and we'll take a line of credit. And then what Pioneer does now, we didn't do it with Callis and Baileyville, we learned our lesson, is as the network's being built, we sign customers up. Don't get it all done and then come back to sign them up. So the revenue stream is going to begin. If they're in a place and they're connecting, they're going to sign customers up. So that's why, going back to the MCA and the loan piece, you want to make sure that you really shoot for the moon. Go for as much as you think you can reasonably get.
One of the things I'll touch on is we're kind of talking about that, in the utility, out of the utility. One of the reasons that I'm looking at this, so that I can properly advise SPIAC on what I think of the model is the fact that it's a capital asset to the community. It's on your books. This thing has a stated value, just like a cable company. Half a cable company's business model is essentially what their network is worth. And this has the same thing. It's kind of like renting a car or a home versus owning a car or home. And that's one of the reasons I'm really attracted to what this type of model can do, is that for a small community, in our case, for a reservation, a tribal entity, it has a lot of value added into it. And the fact that it's sort of almost paying for itself, like an investment property, if you will, that has a lot of value to it. So that's one of the things that I'm really looking at this and why I see a lot of value in it from a small community, perspective.
And Nick, you think about it, it's very similar to Eastern Maine Electric here up in our area. We have Eastern Maine Electric's a co-op, and we have very reasonably low electrical rates because it's a co-op. DBU's a nonprofit. Nobody's getting paid in this. The only guy who gets paid in DBU is our network operator. The rest of us are all volunteers. So, the revenue coming in is not going out to out-of-state stockholders and CEOs, and it goes back into your system. So it pays down that capital asset that Chris is talking about much quicker because it's all going back to the town.
Dan, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
And I'm the new guy here, so please forgive me. It might sound ignorant, but I have to ask. Why don't we just go get service from Pioneer? Why do we need DBU?
Well, because you'd have to, either way you look at it, you've got to pay for the network. So what DBU has done, the reason that this is working for these other towns to join us is that about 18 to 20% of the actual cost to put these networks in place is non-infrastructure costs. That's legal, it's insurance, it's maintenance. There's a lot of money that goes out that's not putting a cable on a pole. When the DBU, because Calais and Baileyville, we've already put this legal work in place. I haven't gotten the bill yet from Eaton Peabody, but DBU contracted with them to work with MCA we've finally got a template out of MCA now that we can use for other towns where they don't have to pay those legal costs.
Right.
So yeah, Perry or any town you could set up your own utility like DBU. That's certainly an option. And there's some places in Maine that are looking at that. But you got to realize there is 18 to 20% non-infrastructure cost. You're going to have to do all that legal work, and there's a lot of it. And then you got insurance, pole licensing. There's a lot to it that people don't realize.
Right, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Because we already, I think that Perry is in a unique situation because we already have live fiber running down our street that many people don't know about, and so I'm all for the Pioneer DBU, product coming through. I just wanted some clarity as to, what the value added services that you guys are.
That's the irony of it all, Paul, is that Consolidated and Spectrum have got hundreds, if not thousands of miles of fiber all over the state of Maine.
Yeah, but not that.
They could have done this 30 years ago.
Right.
They've got an infrastructure in place now. In a lot of in Consolidated's case, they got about $86 million during the CAF2 round of grants about 5 or 6 years ago. This is called the Connect America Fund, where they put these DSL networks. Well, they built fiber within 3 miles of every residence in these little towns like Cooper, Princeton, not Princeton, but the smaller ones, Crawford, Medibemps, Charlotte. They've got fiber to these cabinets. They're very close. They could do this, but they don't want to because they don't want to spend the money.
Yeah.
It's too bad. We can't leverage those assets.
Just from my education. Oh, sorry. Just from my education, when you say there's live fiber running down in Perry, who's the provider with a fiber network?
Well, that's the thing. I feel like there's already a deal in place with DBU and Pioneer, and I don't want to be the guy who throws in another provider and ruin or disrupt or interrupt or I would love to see competition in our area because it will lower my cost or get me better service or what have you. And it's not that I'm not going to share it. Of course I will, but I think that the DBU Pioneer combo is the best option for our utility. The rest of them don't even come close. Consolidated Fidium is on another planet. And the other two, they offer HFC, which is not irrelevant at this point. And so you guys are, in my estimation, the only option. Axiom's footprint is too small and they're down south of Machias. They're not coming up this way. And so I think that you guys are really the only game in town, but GWI still has live service here, offering one gig service, symmetrical, up to 10. So, I mean, it's here already, but I'm not suggesting that. I'm just saying that GWI,
to my knowledge, I don't believe there's a complete fiber network already built in Perry.
Oh, of course there is. I've had it for 3 years.
I mean,
If I may jump in for a second, I'm going to reiterate that there is no deal or anything else between Perry and DBU or Pioneer.
Yeah.
The other thing that I want to say is, excuse me, GWI was invited to attend a meeting with this committee and they declined.
Right.
Even when I threw back at GWI and said, it's a possible 3 community possible build out, I got back thanks, but no thanks.
Yeah, they really don't want to serve the residential market as far as I know when I spoke with them recently. And so I think that the DBU Pioneer combo is perfect.
And Paul, just to follow up to one, I'm kind of impartial in this too. I'm looking at it purely so that I can advise somebody properly. Yeah, when GWI is running through there, now that I kind of get the scope of it, I'm assuming that what they're offering is their standard sort of business, their commercial grade product.
Exactly right.
And if you happen to be on that, you can either pay for their commercial rates.
That's right.
But the fact that they haven't extended that network out into the residential means that they're not going to. They've done the analysis. There is no ROI there, and they never will. That would be my professional opinion based on industry experience.
That's exactly the same feedback they offered me as well.
Yeah, they're just operating off of 3-ring binder, wherever that happens to be.
Exactly.
If you're on Route 1 in
I
Perry,
happen to be right at the FAT, right, you know, at the corner of the building. So just in case anyone was asking, I just wanted to hear out loud, you know, with the value that DBU brings. Since you're not technically the last mile provider, you are you provide IP transport for Pioneer to service our communities. Is that?
we basically, what DBU through these towns has done is we've built the physical infrastructure. It's what's called it's a dark fiber network. There's no signal in it until a provider puts a piece of equipment in one of our COs, one of our cabinets, like Pioneer has done.
Yep.
They provide the signal and it transports across the community-owned fiber. And we had what's called a home run network, where there's a dedicated fiber to every resident and every business. That allows us, you know, to have multiple ISPs on the same block. So, you know, we don't have multiple right now, but we are negotiating with a couple. We're hoping to get a second in there. And hopefully that will happen. I think as we get more and more subscribers, we get a bigger customer base, will be more attractive to that happening.
Well, I can't wait for you guys to roll on down Route 1.
Hey, Dan, this is John again. You mentioned earlier that Pioneer Wireless will basically 1,200 feet worth of line or fiber optics, anything above that would be an additional cost to the homeowner. And probably Scott knows better than I do as far as how many people actually live farther than 1,200 feet off of that main line. And is that negotiable with Pioneer Wireless that we get fiber optics to the premise versus that 1,200 foot limitation?
I can tell you what's happened in Alexander and in Calais and Bailiff on the more rural places. That's a negotiation between the consumer and Pioneer. DBU has nothing to do with that, but it has been the cost to, depending on how far it is, but ones that are, you know, within 300, 400, 500 feet of that 1,200 has been quite reasonable to finish the build. It hasn't been a big game changer for the ones that we've dealt with. I don't know the exact numbers. That would be a conversation with Pioneer.
And John, just for kind of quick reference to when you're thinking about that in your head, it doesn't seem like much. That's essentially 6 telephone poles, you know, of your electrical service to get to that, you know, and how many of those. Oh, Scott, I think you're trying to talk and I'm talking to you. Sorry.
Sorry. I just say 1,200 feet's a long ways. It would be less than 10% of the town if I had to guess. I mean, you're talking like, you know, lakefront owners and things like that. I mean, 1,200 feet would cover the entire shore road, all those homes that are down on the waterfront.
Yeah.
And I think Chris could address, because he's a network builder, he could address to this. As you do the network design, as you're looking at where all these homes are, you want to put your splice cabinets, you know, closer to where, you know, those, rather than have them sitting, you know, 400 feet away from where they have to be, get them closer to where all your population is, where the houses are. So make it part of your network design to help minimize that having to go for more than 1,200 feet.
What's the build time on a town like Perry or Alexander?
Pioneer has been putting out there 2 years has been pretty much the general consensus. A lot of it has to do with Consolidated, which is, well, I won't go into Consolidated. That's another conversation, but they are terrible about timely access to their telephone poles. By law, they have to allow people to attach to their poles. They are able to take up to 180 days to give you licensing to get on the poles. In Alexander, they kept us well over 2 years before they gave us the license to actually be on the pole. Only because they didn't want the competition. Or another piece too is their workforce is limited. They've got issues with that as well. But legally, they're supposed to do it within 180 days. So that they're getting better at that. But one of the reasons it takes time is waiting for just the actual being able to actually attach to the pole.
And if Perry goes down this road, you're going to start hearing really familiar terms to other communities, things like make ready and poll applications and the process that these things have to go through. It's cumbersome. It's a pain in the neck. It's very slow, but it is what it is. And it's and it does eat up a ton of the actual project budget time wise.
And fortunately, we have Dan to handle some of those administrative burdens for us, right?
That was my question is, so DBU would do the footwork when it comes to permits as far as access to these poles, correct?
Actually, Pioneer does that. They submit
Okay,
they submit the applications into Consolidated, and they get a chunk of poles at a time. And then what Perry would need to do and other towns need to do is look at any areas where you may need easements. That's something to, if you got to go across some private property, if the towns can identify that ahead of time, that helps, the build. In Alexander, for example, we had one easement we had to get, and the person was out of town, and then the property was sold to somebody else. So we had to do some chasing in order to get the easement signed. We did. It's all taken care of, but those are little hiccups that can hold you up a little bit.
So what do we need to provide to you, Dan, to get a high level estimate of everything but the hookups that the ISP would do to the house itself?
I think there's, you can put out an RFP to, maybe Chris can help with other companies. I know Pioneer you contact them and they'll give you a high level design. They've given a high level design for Eastport already. I don't know, did that include Perry as well, Chris, or just Eastport?
I don't think so.
That's what I'm working on right now. Right now, Ray, kind of the overall unofficial stance is you guys are already sort of wrapped into the planning efforts. If Perry decides they want to go forward with this, you guys, vote, hey, let's explore this. Those initial planning stages are kind of already being factored into it because that's how this project makes sense. So the high level design portion to get the estimates that you have, so you can start doing your pro formas and, being able to present numbers to your town council and your community, your community members, we'll pretty much have for you here in the next couple of weeks as part of that process. I personally would love to see MCA give you guys sort of that funding portion too, because again, you're kind of in there. I don't think that's doable, but if somebody hasn't asked already, I would recommend that you do that as well. Just kind of say, hey,
I did ask.
Okay, I kind of figured you would have.
Yeah.
So Chris, I have a question around that. So since Pleasant Point is past Perry, if you come up with a plan and it's approved, does that ease the burden for Perry? If it's, if fiber comes past us, through us, and beyond, over yonder, then does that make our job easier? Or
yeah, because what you're looking at, like, there's going to be like, so for the Perry point, like, you guys are close to the 3-ring binder, so getting your backbone to place wouldn't be as huge of a cost. But then you'd be not sharing the other residual costs that come in. Like, if we look at this from a network design standpoint, the most logical place to feed it will probably be a cabinet centrally located in the Pleasant Point vicinity. So now you're only talking about having to build out half the distance.
Right.
So there's all those shared sort of logistics that come with network design that everybody, as you do scale. And again, if then, Charlotte or some of the other towns come online, as it grows, all of the shared costs becoming, less burdensome on each individual community.
Right.
so does that mean that it would behoove us to maybe sit back a little bit and let's see what happens with Pleasant Point, or to lower our costs, or no?
I mean, Danny can answer what I don't think there's any cost savings to waiting. And the other piece you take, and this isn't like a doomsday scenario kind of thing, but they do have only X amount of money, and if you're not in, kind of the pathways to get into the first couple rounds of funding, there's no telling what, can happen with these funding things. Things can change, the requirements can change, everything is still kind of being figured out as they go. So you always take the chance, like anything else, if let's see what happens, maybe the opportunities dry up, and that doesn't mean they will. And I'm not trying to, get it right in there, but I can't envision from a network design standpoint where you would benefit doing it later versus doing it now, to be honest.
Like to the point I made earlier, the MCAs, they're very keen on multiple communities working together. That's going to look very favorable in their grant when they're looking at handing this money out. And Chris is right, it's a limited pot and it's going to disappear quickly. There are multiple areas that MCA can look good politically because they've taken care of a good chunk of Maine. They're going to go for it.
And then you also have the kind of the specter hanging over everybody's neck is material availability for these builds. Maine's not the only state doing this. This is happening across the country. Right now, we're in sort of a lull of materials being available, and it's not looking all that terrible. But come springtime, when everybody starts building en masse, it's going to be a problem. So the farther communities wait into this, I think the more extended the timelines are going to become. We're looking at a 2-year from start to finish, which is a great time period. Some of these things are going to start looking like 3 years, 4 years from the time they want to get going to the time it can actually be completed due to manpower and material shortages. So you're also just looking at the sort of cost of opportunity to providing that network to your communities.
So does the 25% out of the 320 or so, let's say that's 80, potential, the take rate subscribers, is that enough to, for MCA to say, hey, that's doable? That seems like a low number, but.
I think you'll have to you'll get that high level design for, what the network build is actually going to cost. So once you have that number, then you can actually work those numbers out. You'll be able to see, I think it's reasonable to ask MCA for 75% of the cost. But say you're picking up 25% of that network build cost, that gives you the math model. Then okay, we've got 314 homes in Perry or whatever it happens to be. How many of those do we need to be able to satisfy that 25% of the network build?
Right.
Then you'll be able to, that'll help bring these numbers in. You'll get a better feel for it.
Yeah. Well, I know I can sell this to 10 people. So
there you go.
I'll buy 10.
That's a start.
Elaine, are we okay on time?
As long as you need.
Thank you.
I got one question there. Dan, I think you mentioned, and also Chris, that the MCA looks favorable upon towns that all work together. Does that mean that we'll all have to agree on the same ISP?
Well, you're basically, what'll happen with say you're going to have consolidators going to approach you. You're going to be in discussions with them. They're not going to have multiple ISPs. You're going to be, if you decide to go with them, it'll be consolidated. If you decide to go with Spectrum, it'll be Spectrum. You won't have any choice in that matter.
But the difference being, in this case, you have infrastructure, which is the towns as well, and then separately, Pioneer is the ISP. But with the other companies, they serve both functions in the same package. They
Correct.
both own the physical cable and provide the service on the cable.
Well, they'll give you different models. There's some out there now that are working where the towns in the end could end up owning the infrastructure, but they're still sitting with one ISP. Yeah. There's no option for another. We're starting to see, I know that the DBU model, when we did this, about the whole idea about paying back to the towns, I'm now seeing other ISPs out there starting to emulate that thought, because they understand that's quite attractive. Why wouldn't a town want money coming back to the town rather than going out? Mm-hmm. But there's different models there. With a consolidator or Spectrum, like I said, they're gonna be the sole provider.
And John, when you're talking to all of the other companies and ISPs and things like that, the question that you ask that answers the sort of availability of other ISPs is whether they're proposing an open network or a closed network. That's what determines whether you can have options from an ISP standpoint.
Right.
Could you define that, Chris, open and closed?
Sure. So the biggest thing that really determines it is how the network is designed. What Danny mentioned in the beginning, when you talk about home run fibers, meaning that each fiber comes right out of the cabinet, goes directly to a home. That's what allows you to have an open network. It's a little more expensive to build, but that's what it provides. If you don't have that type of network, you can't have the signals kind of crisscrossing from multiple providers. So that's why they don't like it, for one thing, because it's more expensive to build. And then obviously they don't like competition, which is fair enough. If I built the network and owned it, I wouldn't want competition on it either. But that's really the delineation, is whether you have the availability to pump in more than one signal into the entire network is kind of what determines whether it's closed or open.
Really a philosophical thing too with these companies. Like in Pioneer's case, or anybody that wants to be in the DBU system, you think about it, they have no infrastructure costs. They don't have to put a capital outlay. All they have to do is put some equipment in a cabinet, and they start making their profit off of that $60 a month. Where a Consolidated or the other ones, they put money in the game, they put some money in the game and they're going to expect it back. So the models are just, it's a philosophical difference. We're more of we're co-op type thing. We want to be community owned and not go to a board, not go to stockholders.
Did the other towns that you've offered service in, where what was Consolidated considered in those towns as well, and then people opted not to go with them?
Yep.
Or were they not considered?
No, they've had discussions. Every one of them has talked to Consolidated, Spectrum, and they got the same answer we did with Callis and Baileyville, that they were just not interested. We've
Well,
noticed.
that's what I'm asking. It's from my understanding, their Fidium product, and I think there's a distinction there between Fidium and Consolidated, but that's another conversation. But I think it stops at Ellsworth. I don't believe it comes to Washington County, and so
They're Consolidated is actively, they set up this Fidium thing because by putting this separate branch, it's removed them from a lot of legal regulations that they have as Consolidated.
provider of last resort and that kind of thing.
Right, and they put the Fidium out there that they've got a horrible customer service record. So they're trying to change the name.
Right.
Our home here in New Hampshire, we had Consolidated fiber to this house, and it was $90 a month. And after a year, all of a sudden we got a bill in January, it was $220. I called them up and I said, what's with that? I said, I'm not paying that, just rip it out. And Consolidated said, oh, no, we got this new company, Fidium. We can put them in there, it'd be the same price. So a Consolidated truck showed up.
Yeah, I know. They're just rebranding their
Right.
crappy product, as far as I'm concerned.
And they're doing, they're like in the greater East Grand area where they got $8 million to build out there. They're going to do fiber out there. It'll be Fidium out in the greater East, up in Danforth, up in that section of Maine. And they got another 8 million from other areas in Maine, but that's what they're doing. They're going to expand their Fidium product.
Right, but is that because of the coming down from Holton? The expansion is coming downward. Is that? Do you think?
For Consolidated, they've got fiber everywhere. They could do this anywhere they want.
Okay. I was told that it had to be connected, like you can't have Fidium in the middle of nowhere. It has to be Fidium behind them to kind of extend out, but I could be wrong. You know what? When we talk to them, that's a great question for them.
Right.
Yeah.
And Paul, if it helps, the way to look at it is they can have it in the middle of nowhere. If like they say they had DSL in that area, but there's no fiber currently. If somebody wanted to pay them to put Fidium in, they would use the existing backbone that provides the DSL connection to now become Fidium. So their footprint is huge. CCI has a very good chance of turning their entire network into a fiber network, where that's the only choice and the best choice. That's great. It brings fiber to where people need it. But it obviously has a very different approach than this one.
Mm-hmm.
And they wouldn't be doing it without huge influx of, public funds.
Yeah.
They were not going to be anywhere near that unless they get a ton of money out of the public coffers there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't even think they deserve a seat at the table, but that's not for me to say.
You always listen, you never know.
I'm not a fan. When I call them for service, they can't find me in their, they can't even find me in there. I have four houses. They can't find me in their system, and it's crazy.
Any other comments from the committee?
So I'm all about competition. So if DBU owns the infrastructure, but does that prevent like another ISP? I know Pioneer Wireless, you work closely with them, but if Spectrum or Fidium came in and just wanted to provide the internet service and the bundles and so forth, is that something that would be available to the residents of Perry?
See, DBU does, just to be clear, DBU does not own the networks. DBU is, we're a nonprofit that basically runs the networks, but they're owned by the towns themselves. And they're wide open. If Spectrum, you think in the DBU footprint, we've run fiber to all these homes, right? Directly to the house. So we've asked Spectrum and Consolidate, yeah, come on board. Come sell your signal right here. We've got the network built. But they won't do it. They want to own it from their end to the customer.
But if they do change that philosophy,
We'd take them in a heartbeat.
right?
We'd
Okay.
take them in a heartbeat. Yep. I would
Right.
welcome the competition. I wish they would come.
Well,
I
I
think-
mean, just that there's a lot of senior citizens, and they seem to feel comfortable with the bundles as far as their phones and everything else. I know a lot of younger people. Yeah, they'll basically go to whatever streaming service and different cell phones and so forth. But it seems like for the senior communities, they like everything all in one package.
Yeah, that's going to be, that's whole idea of cable TV, that bundle stuff, that's going to be disappearing. It's disappearing on a steady basis. There's the TV companies on these networks, they can't make any money at it. It costs so much money to be able to buy those channels. That's why streaming is now taking over. So the idea of the cable systems, where you bundle your TV, your internet, and you can still do it, but it's going to be going away. You're going to be moving to streaming, whether you want to or not. That's where it's going.
I think also, John, I might be able to possibly answer part of your question, is that if Perry went with and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, if Perry went with the DBU model through using Pioneer being an open access, if a resident did not want to use Pioneer, they could still do, sorry, it's Pepper night, my dogs are barking. Sorry. And that if they wanted to stick with Spectrum, they could.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
John, to answer, maybe I didn't answer your question correctly. On the Pioneer system right now in the DBU footprint, they're bundling. They can get TV, phone, and internet. That's a service offered by Pioneer.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you clarified everything when you said that Consolidated and Spectrum didn't want any part of the action. They didn't want to utilize the infrastructure that's owned by the towns.
Too bad. We could really get this done.
Yeah.
And John, I've heard a couple of other communities, DBU and non-DBU, just as towns look at this stuff. Anywhere that there's an incumbent cable provider, if a town looks to do a fiber initiative, that cable stays on the telephone poles. There's no proposals that they have to tear. It's a telephone poles are a leased space. It's kind of like advertising. Anybody who wants to pay the price of admission can put their lines up on those poles. I have never in my 20+ year career heard of anybody having to rip down a provider to put up their stuff unless the town. There have been cases where cable companies have actually abandoned their systems. That's why they're looking at putting a fiber network, because the cable company was making so little that they just said we're out and abandoned their plan. But in no case are you going to lose your existing cable providers because you decide to build a fiber network. It's just kind of one more way that you'll have choice.
That's what happened in Indian Township. Spectrum just decided they didn't want to be there anymore, and they just left. And they left their strand cables, the connecting cables on all those telephone poles. It was much easier to wire them up.
Since Spectrum and Consolidated has a presence in in Perry. Can we expect a smear campaign of some sort, you know, when we go down this path?
You can expect some pressure, yes. They will I know we noticed at our last board meeting in Baileyville and Calais right now, Spectrum they've hired somebody who's knocking on doors, offering crazy internet prices now, trying to peel back the customers that we've taken away from them. So yeah, they're not going to go quiet. In the beginning, we had no pushback whatsoever, but now because there's all this public money out there and they're at the trough, they want to build these networks and they want to secure their place with a bunch of customers. So they'll be competitive. Do you have Spectrum in Perry now?
Yeah, some people do.
Yeah, limited. It doesn't, it actually, there's a section of Route 1, a 5-mile section that they bypassed altogether. And so they took a right onto the shore road, went down to Gin Cove and then spit back out at the Strawberry Patch and continued north to Calais.
No, it doesn't go all the way through because I tried to hook up to them about 4 years ago
Oh,
and it does not go past my house.
oh, so they didn't even, wow.
No, it stops at the Loring's place.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's such a strange way to do it.
They only wanted $10,000 to put the line in.
Yeah, I tried to have the line installed down the South Winter Road, and they wanted 10,000 a mile.
Yeah.
So they wanted $40,000. Oh my god. So I don't think they're viable either. That's my. I don't.
Well, we'll find out. Spectrum is
yeah.
going to talk to us next week.
Yep.
That's crazy.
B, I would just offer, this is a personal opinion, but I would be cautious if they put something in front of you called a bulk service agreement. Which
I'm aware of what that is.
okay, because that can really hook you into something for a lengthy period of time, and it's not a really good way to go.
So for folks who don't know, bulk service agreement is something Spectrum may or may not offer. Perry, I have been invited by a lot of communities to sit into these. And so in a nutshell, and I talked about this at this committee's last meeting, in a nutshell, Spectrum will offer something like, say, $35 a month for every household or every available location. So even if they went to Perry, for example, with this bulk service rate, just as a heads up, they would say $35 per month per household. And Scotty, I did check, and it's 314 households. And while we were on this call, I did check. So it'd be $35 a month at 314 households, and never mind possible places that they could connect to. So even if Ray says, nope, I'm going to stick with CCI or Consolidated, the town of Perry would still be on the hook for $35 a month for Ray, for his household.
Right.
And Ray would have to pay that $35 a month to the town because Spectrum will say, how you do it is you tack it onto their tax bill, their property tax bill. And so Ray would have to pay that $35 a month on his tax bill and then have to pay Consolidated on top of it because he doesn't want Spectrum. That's a bulk rate in a nutshell. That's a bulk rate.
Gives them a guaranteed 100% take rate.
And Elaine, does that also mean that they would not extend service to the gaps that they have?
That is correct. Yep. And in fact, I met with Jonesport. Jonesport asked me to attend, and they're meeting with Spectrum on this, and I did. And Spectrum promised them the moon, and 2 weeks later came back and said, "Oops, we're sorry, we're wrong. We can't do that."
And they had the same thing in Southport. Remember, those people really got hung out to dry.
Southport, yeah. So this is not something, but anyway, that's what they're referring to. So Perry, you may be offered that, so just to kind of be aware of it. I do have a PowerPoint that I sent to Jonesport afterwards. But Chris is a great resource. Yeah. Chris. So anyway, great resource. Chris is a great resource for all of this, and so he's well aware of what a bulk service rate is, what it is. So basically, as Dan said, that with a bulk service rate, you're paying the town and all your taxpayers will be paying for a service whether or not they take it. And what's really funny is guess who gets to pay that? So the town gets to pay like monthly, gets to pay to Spectrum. And so the town then has to bill. So now your Spectrum's billing department and collections department.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a little, so if they
Well,
offer it,
that's
just
worth the
you can
discount right
list,
there.
just be aware of what it is and whatever, but just be aware of what it is. In a nutshell, that's it. Chris, Dan,
So what's
did
the
I pretty much-
process then? This goes to some proposal would go to the selectmen, Scott, and then you guys would vote on it. And then, what is I guess after we review and decide on who, if we want or what we want, then what do we do after that?
I think what we end up doing is putting together an RFP, sending, because that's the formalized mechanism that you need to do, regards for proposals. Then we get the official responses back from everyone who wants to respond to us. I mean, some of them may say, we're not interested in Perry, so they don't send us anything. But after that, then it's up to Perry. Hopefully the committee working together with the select board comes to a decision that they want to go with such and such a company. Then it's up to the company and Perry to figure out how to make this work as partners.
I would offer a
You have to have a
suggestion.
partner to go in for the grants.
Yeah, I would offer a suggestion there. If you're, when you're deciding which model you're going to go with. I know what we did with Alexander and Cooper and the other towns is we went to an actual town meeting with the select board and citizens from your town who should be in the room when your select boards decide which way you're going to go. Just it makes it so much easier down the road. I know one particular town in our area went with the bulk service agreement and just the select board made the decision, and a lot of the people in town were not very happy about it. So it's kind of, what town meetings are like. It can get contentious, but in my opinion, it's much better to be transparent and have everybody know what you're thinking of doing and then make your decision from that. That's just my 2 cents.
Now, my take on all that is once the committee has an idea of which direction they want to go, then maybe ask the provider to come back and speak with the select board, one-on-one meeting, and present and kind of weigh it to them. That's just my take on it. I'm not saying that's how it should be done or anything. That's just my take. I wouldn't feel right taking the brunt of the responsibility all on my own. I mean, I definitely am looking at the pros and cons of everything. I guess that's where I'm at. But
I think, Scotty, your connection could be a poster child for this effort.
Why is that?
It's cutting in and out. It's every other word. We're only getting like every other word.
I'm going to supper anyway. I'll talk to you later.
Well, that may be the best idea at this point. Dan, I want to thank you very much for your presentation and hanging around to answer our questions.
You're very welcome. Any further questions? You got my email address. Anybody feel free to reach out.
I certainly will, or we certainly will.
And thank you, Chris, for attending as well.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, and thank you, Dan.
Yes, thank you.
That was helpful.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for
Guys.
inviting me. It really
All right.
shed some light on the progress.
Good night, everyone.
See you all later.
Good
Good
night.
night, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.